Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem of my Blitz game number 286. I was white here, kicked off with knight f3, trying to play a Reti opening, c4, d5, c4. But now my opponent plays e6, so d4 I guess would be the Reti proper if my opponent played the move pawn to d4, the most direct way to play against it, and maybe the best move too. If you see the statistics here, that looks to be good for black. But e6 is a kind of a solid way to play, and now I can transpose into a Queen's Gambit declined by playing d4. But I continue with g3, and he goes knight f6, and after looking it up later, turns out this is called the Neo-Catalan, which can also arise from an English opening move order, so with c4 first. So anyway, bishop g2 was played, and now the most common move here is bishop to e7. Logical developing move, or d takes c4 or c5, just putting another pawn in the center, building up that big center. These all look like reasonable moves. But my opponent plays bishop to d7, so that guards against this check. There's always this idea of queen check here and picking up the pawn after d takes c5, so maybe that black is threatening to take the pawn here. One of the options here, let's just look at the notation tab from here on. One of the options here is just for me to take, which the engine was preferring for a while, but after, yeah, okay, it's just jumping around. A lot of different moves can be played here. But I chose the move b3, thinking that I might want to take back with the pawn, actually, and also gets my bishop a good diagonal here. So knight c6, good. Normal developing moves, bishop b2, bishop e7, knight c3. So all this seems very standard and normal. And now I was looking at this and I was realizing that black has kind of a cramped setup, and there's probably an opportunity for me just to grab space in the center in particular with this move d4. So since black has neglected to push on with d5 when he d4, since black neglected to play d5 to d4, it gives me the opportunity to play this here in a favorable situation. So I thought came out of the opening pretty good here. He decided to take here, and now I get two pawns in the center, controlling a lot of squares. I do have to be careful that these don't become undermined later. They are potentially weak, since they are, well, this one in particular, the c pawn, is not supported by any other pawn. The d pawn, I can always use the e pawn to support it, but well, let's just follow what happens. My opponent plays a6, stopping my knight from coming in here, my castle, and rook b8, setting up the idea of b5 to undermine the c-pawn. And I placed my rook on the b file, thinking, you know, if this opens up, it's a good spot for the rook. And my opponent plays b5. And this is an interesting moment. I did think about this move. The chess engine is recommending knight e5 here, just to defend the pawn. And I thought about this a little bit. I didn't realize quite how strong it was. The point about knight e5 that I was missing is that it's also a threat. The knight is attacking here, and the bishop is attacking there, so the knight is just hanging on c6. Black's knight is hanging on c6, so he needs to do something immediately. He's got to move the knight away, so he doesn't have time to take. He could exchange, or he could... So I was thinking that probably the exchange would be best, and then knight to g4, going after my pawn. But the bishop here is in a position to support that. So although the pawn is hanging at the moment after this exchange, now the bishop is defending it. And looks like this is a good position for white. The knight here looks like it has an aggressive post, but where can it really go as long as I'm holding on to my advanced e-pawn? Seems like black is in a bit of trouble here. So that would have been a good way to play. Instead, I pushed on with c5, so not the best move, and now black can get an edge by pushing on with b4. Instead, he played knight a5, and so the game continues. I go knight e5, and now bishop to e8. He decides not to trade off his bishop. I wasn't entirely sure if I was going to take that bishop or not. This light squared bishop is his bad bishop in this pawn structure. because it hits the pawn, but there's open files for it to go on. It might later come out to c6 and challenge my bishop, so that makes sense for him to hold on to it. I drop my bishop back to a1, keep it on the, open up this b file for the rook. He goes knight d7, challenging my knight here. And now here I make a mistake. The engine points out a really good move. I just didn't think of this in the game. Knight d3. You know, not leaving the knight there and having my pawns messed up, but rerouting the knight to a better square. And this is just a nice central square where it's looking out on b4 amongst other squares, also supporting the pawn on c5. So it just exerts a lot of influence from that square. It would be a nice move. Instead, I supported the knight with the move f4. Why are you... okay. And now he just takes it. And I have this kind of awkward pawn structure here in the center, and black is doing fine. He continues the knight c4. Yeah, I also gave away... the knight on e5 was protecting the c4 square, and now I'm just giving it away. I don't have a good way to challenge this knight anymore, so he's exerting some influence, and there's an immediate threat of knight to e3 with the fork. So queen to d3, guarding against the fork, and then f6, undermining the center. And we continue in a range of about equality here. So after a few more moves, bishop to g6, attacking my queen. I can't move my queen away because the rook behind it would... I don't want to give up the exchange, so I block. And I chose to block with the bishop rather than the knight because the knight might get into an awkward pin there. So I think this is all okay. And queen e7. And now I play a4, trying to undermine the pawns over on the queen side. And black counterattacks with bishop g5. And a nice move. Putting pressure on this pawn on e3, which is a little bit difficult to defend. I guess I could have tried rook fe1, but you know, you hate to make your pieces passive like that. It's just pulling it off of an active file and putting it here to a strictly defensive role. And I want to keep this rook on the b file because I want to keep pressure on the b pawn. So I decided to take and then solve the problem with this pawn by pushing. But this introduces another problem, which is I didn't spot this during the game, and my opponent didn't either. But he could play the move knight d2 here with a fork of my two rooks. And now I can escape by playing rook takes, and he plays rook takes, rook d1, and knight to f3 check, and king to h1, say. And suddenly, basically, black has just activated all his pieces. He didn't win any material. He didn't end up winning the exchange, but he's just in excellent shape here with all of his pieces over on my king's side. And my pieces are not as well coordinated. You know, maybe I can do something with the bishop on the long diagonal, but I have to push the d pawn out of the way first. And looks like black just has a really good, excellent, a good active position, and should be in good shape with that. So that knight d2 idea, I missed it, and my opponent missed it too, fortunately. Yeah, it was made possible by that e3 move. When I played e3 to solve the problem of my pawn, I created a new problem by opening up that diagonal for his queen. Okay, so he pushes on with c6, supporting, yeah, so he is starting to worry about the queenside pressure here. So I trade off my loose a-pawn for my isolated a-pawn for his pawn. And so now he's got a pretty solid structure here, but I have hopes of undermining it this way. And we'll see this happen in the game. I exchange rooks here. He takes back. And then I push on with d5. And the engine, so d5 was a mistake. The engine spots it right away. And I'll show you exactly where the mistake lies. It's right here. After I take back, he shouldn't take immediately. He should throw on the move rook d8. And then this is very strong, right? It pins the pawn. So I was counting on him taking, and then I could grab the b pawn and get rid of this annoying passed pawn here. That's how I was trying to solve my problems in this position. But by just pinning my my d pawn here with this rook, he leaves me in an awkward situation. So what can I play here? I could try d6, I guess. But yeah, that hangs the c pawn. queen takes c5 check. So, and I can't, so I can't go forward. I can't take because of the pin. Bishop to c3 is recommended by the chess engine. I don't even know what that does. After bishop to c3, you can just take the pawn and be in good shape. So that was a mistake, and but of course this move d5 was a mistake. But black has to play accurately to take advantage of that mistake, and black missed the idea here. So he takes d5, but that's, I think, a lesson for all you chess players out there. Don't just fall into your opponent's plans. You know, everybody is going to look at the natural sequence of captures there. Look for other moves you can stick in between. Those in-between moves will often win games for you. And here, the move is pinning with the rook. Okay, so he just took with the queen, and this is one of the lines I had calculated, and I thought this would be fine for me. And so we get into this endgame. It's a rook and bishop versus a rook and a knight. And I've opened the diagonal for my bishop, so my bishop is a good piece here. And so there's a slight edge for white, probably not a winning edge because there's so few pawns left. But right away, let's see, what's the engine recommending? The engine is recommending knight e3. Activating the knight is the best way to play. So rook d8 is maybe not the best move. Well, I don't play the best moves all the time here, but I get some kind of advantage out of this endgame, possibly more than what I deserve. I really wanted, this is an interesting moment here, I really wanted to play this move rook to d7, but unfortunately after rook to d7, he just can take the pawn, and now I can take his rook, but the knight is in position, and now I grab here, and this is just completely dead drawn with two pawns only on one side of the board and a bishop versus a knight. There's no way to play it for an advantage. So you know, I'm just looking for ways to keep an edge, so this is okay, I guess. I'm not giving away the game just yet. But king f1, it says, not the most accurate move. King f2, that's funny. These little differences can add up. Fortunately for me, he didn't push on with his pawn. That's the real threat that the black has in this position, is his pawn is pretty close to queening, and I don't have any pieces in the way. My pawn is also close to queening, but right now my rook is in the way and his knight is in a good position. But both of our kings are coming over to try and hold things up. So let's go forward a few moves. This move here, yeah, g5 was a big mistake. Actually, you saw the evaluation shift change there. He needs to activate his rook or push on with the pawn. Activate his knight or push on with the pawn. The knight's a bit misplaced over there. So wasting time on the king side with these pawn moves is a mistake in this endgame. So now I'm going to win a pawn here. And he defends it with knight b3, kicking my bishop, and plays knight c5 check. And I just come up with the king, and he's being very creative here in his defense. So now this knight move here attacks my rook. And I missed my best chance here. Bishop a3 check is an interesting opportunity to kind of push his king around. It's hard. I think I was getting a little low on time. It's a little bit hard to find these moves. So if the king goes to this square, then rook here check picks up the knight. So the king has to go the other way. And so driving his king back is really good. And now the bishop can come into e7. And my pieces are just starting to dominate. He's got to move his rook. And then now I can get my rook to this d7 square, which is where I wanted, out of the way of the pawn, and now this pawn is threatening to promote. So this would be really good. I missed that bishop a3 idea. I played rook h7, going after these kingside pawns. And he went king g8, hitting my, cancel that, where'd he go? He went d3, pushing his pawn forward. And now this is a winning sequence. I thought, I actually had miscalculated this during the game, but I ended up playing it anyway. Rook to h8, because I couldn't find anything else. King e7, rook takes. I thought he could take with the knight and then win this pawn, but that doesn't work. If he plays knight takes, I have time to play c7. This is what I didn't realize. I thought he was going to queen, But I have this move, bishop to f6 check, a really neat deflection tactic. And now when the king moves, wherever it moves, say it goes back here, I queen with check, and then I pick up this pawn. So he can't take with the knight. And so he takes with the king, and that's as good a move as any, but that gives me time to take this pawn. And now I'm a pawn up, and this should be an easy win. Well, I can't say that. It's always a bit tricky, because when you just have one pawn remaining, your opponent can always sacrifice a piece for it. So this one pawn edge only works because there's a couple extra pawns over here on the king side. So let's go forward a few moves. He goes after my pawn immediately and wins it, and I can't hold on to that pawn. So, but what I can do is get into an endgame where my king is just much closer to the scene of the action. So he had to displace his king in order to round up my pawn, which was the biggest threat here. And now with my advanced king position, I should be winning this. I can gobble up these pawns. And here, that move draws. Isn't it funny? Again, you need precision. So king to h5 or g4. I need to stop his pawn from going forward, and this is a good time to do it. And also, I want to fix black's pawn on a dark square so the bishop can attack it. So this bishop f6 move is really bad because it encourages him to move his pawn forward to g4, and now the only piece that can attack it is the king. So I had an easy win there, and I just gave it away with that one move. Okay, so I go after the pawn, and then I try and chase the knight away. So there's a lot of maneuvering here, but this should all be drawn until this move. So knight h3 is the mistake, huh? He should play knight h1. Kind of a weird move. Okay, but after knight h3, let's see what goes wrong. Oh, well, I can take the pawn. And he can take a pawn. And now, a lot of times, I just have one pawn remaining, and he just has to sacrifice his knight for that pawn, and it's a draw. But the engine seems to think that if with an accurate play, I can hold on to the pawn, and that's what happens in the game. But no, I don't necessarily play the most accurate moves here. But I get my king out of the way so the pawn can go forward. And now he plays king to g2. And I start pushing the pawn, g4. And he plays knight to f4. So I thought this was the losing move, knight f4. But the engine thinks that that's actually a good move. So I thought he could just sit here with his knight guarding the square. If I ever advance the pawn, the knight will take it. And the problem is his king has no moves. So if he goes here, for example, he keeps the knight in place. His king has to stay in touch with the knight and because otherwise I'll take it. So then I deliver a check here. His king goes to the side. And now I can do a tempo move with my bishop. And now knight to g1. And the pawn can start rolling again. So, that's not working because of knight f3 check. So what is the way to win this? So if he doesn't move his knight, if he just goes king to h2, holding on to the knight and trying to hold everything steady, is there a plan for me to win this at all? Bishop to e3, okay. That clamps down on any knight moves, but his king can just go to g2. And bishop to c5. Okay, this is just going to be one of these lines where the computer is going to not do anything. Yeah, so I guess there is no winning plan here. If all that's happening is the king is going back and forth and my bishop is going back and forth, there's no progress in spite of this evaluation. So this is just a draw. So okay, that's what I thought during the game. He can just keep the knight there, and that was a neat trick. The other trick. So if I get my bishop here, then he can drop his knight back down to this square. And if I ever advance the pawn, he's got this check, which picks up the pawn. So a neat trick. Anyway, he played knight f4, and I start pushing on with g5, king f3, bishop b8. And at some point, it gets very difficult for black to defend anymore. So maybe it was actually this move, knight h8. That's when the evaluation really shifts. So this 1.4 just means I'm a pawn up. It doesn't mean I'm winning. It's recommending knight e7 is the best way to hold on here. Okay, that's hard to find, and I have to admit. But now I can chase his knight around a bit, kick it with the pawn, and at this point I don't need the bishop anymore because the pawn is going to queen, and there's no way the knight can get back in time to stop it, and his king is out of play. So the knight is a good fighter. It has lots of tricky tactics, but it's hard for it to stop a pawn sometimes, just depending on the actual position of the knight. It just takes too many moves to get to some square where it can stop the pawn from advancing. Or I guess here to here is probably his best try, but he's just going to be one step too short. So anyway, he played one more move, knight d7. One last trick. Of course, if I rush on with the queening, then this knight here forks the queen and the king, and it'll be a draw. But I just move my king here, get away from any tricks, and then I'm threatening to queen the next move. So that's how the game ended. My opponent resigned here. I think some interesting points in the endgame there. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you again soon. Bye.